Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I joined a dark web cult that claims to merge minds across the internet. Now I can hear their voices in my head. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get sucked into the dark web. I mean, I'd heard all the warnings, the horror stories about illegal markets, hitmen for hire, or worse. But the dark web is like a black hole of curiosity. Once you catch a glimpse of it, it's hard not to fall in. It started as a joke between friends. We'd sit around late at night, throwing ridiculous dark web myths at each other, seeing who would get spooked first. One night, though, after a few beers and a dare I wish I hadn't accepted, I went deeper than I ever intended. One link led to another, and I stumbled upon a forum that wasn't like the others. There were no sketchy listings, no stolen credit cards or fake passports. It was weirdly clean. The title was Collective Minds. No context, no description, just a thread full of cryptic posts. People shared stories of their experiences, not buying or selling things, but talking about a kind of mental connection. It was almost like they were trying to sync their thoughts together across the internet. At first, I thought it was some new age meditation stuff, until I noticed something odd. The users were finishing each other's sentences, like, literally. Curiosity got the better of me. I posted a random question. What's this all about? Within seconds, I got a direct message, not even a reply in the forum, straight to my inbox. It read, "You've been chosen. Click the link to understand." Now, normally I'd delete a message like that without a second thought. But I was already too deep into this weird forum, and I was half convinced it was just an elaborate prank. Maybe some bot scraping keywords or something. So, I clicked the link. It took me to a plain page with one button in the center that said, "Join the collective." For a second, I hesitated. This was crossing the line, even for me. But then I convinced myself it was just an online roleplay, a bit of harmless fun. So, I clicked. The moment I did, my screen flickered. I swear it wasn't just the website. My entire computer glitched out for a second. Then, the page loaded, and all it said was, "Welcome to the collective. Prepare for synchronization." At that point, I was still convinced it was some elaborate joke, but something felt off. My computer fans started whirring louder than usual, and then the weirdest thing happened. I heard a voice, not from my speakers, but in my head. "You're one of us now." I jerked back from the computer, my heart racing. It wasn't my voice. I wasn't even sure it was English, but I understood it. I quickly closed the browser, trying to shake off the creeping feeling crawling up my spine. It must have been my imagination. I'd spent too long staring at the screen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear faint whispers, just a few words here and there, like fragments of thoughts drifting through my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just my brain playing tricks on me. I mean, I'd been reading about this collective mind nonsense all night. Of course I was hearing things, right? But the next day, it got worse. I was sitting in a meeting at work when I suddenly heard it again, clear as day. "He's going to ask you a question." Before I could process it, my boss turned to me and asked for an update on a project. I froze, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I had known he was going to ask before he even said anything. I brushed it off as coincidence. But then it happened again, and again. I'd hear little snippets of thoughts, sometimes my own, sometimes from the people around me. I'd walk past someone on the street, and I'd hear a voice in my head saying, "I'm late, I'm late," only for them to break into a run a second later. The scariest part was that these weren't just random thoughts. They were real. I was somehow hearing people. I didn't know who to turn to. How do you even explain something like this without sounding insane? I tried Googling symptoms, but nothing came close to what I was experiencing. It wasn't just auditory hallucinations. I was hearing real thoughts from people I didn't even know. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, trying to silence the endless whispers, I heard something different. "You're one of us now. You can't escape." That's when I realized. The voice wasn't random anymore. It was them, the collective. And they weren't done with me yet. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, the kind that felt like a jackhammer was digging through my skull. I sat up, the whispers still faint but persistent. They were always there now, a constant hum in the back of my mind. At this point, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something had happened when I clicked that link. I wasn't just imagining things, and I wasn't hallucinating. This was real. I could hear them. But the strangest part? It wasn't just hearing. It was like my thoughts weren't entirely my own anymore. It was subtle at first. Little nudges, like when you have an impulse to do something for no reason. I found myself walking to the window for no reason, staring out at the street below. I wasn't thinking about doing it. I just did it. That's when I noticed the man. He was standing on the sidewalk across the street, staring directly up at me. Not in a casual way, like he was passing by. He was locked onto me, his face completely blank. No expression, no sign of life in his eyes. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just some random guy, right? But deep down, I knew. I could feel it. He was there because of them, the collective. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. The whispers had grown louder. They weren't fragments anymore. They were sentences, full thoughts, not mine, but someone else's, and the man outside. He never left. I peeked through the curtains a couple of times, hoping he'd be gone, but every time I looked, there he was, just standing there. That evening, the whispers changed. "You're ready for your first test." I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. Test? What test? I didn't sign up for anything. I didn't want to be a part of this. I shut off my computer, turned off my phone, anything that could possibly connect me to them. But I couldn't shut off my own mind. They were in there, digging deeper. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and I felt like I was on the verge of losing it. Every time I tried to push the thoughts away, they came back stronger. Later that night, as I sat in my living room, too afraid to sleep, there was a knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat. "Answer it," the voice in my head commanded. I ignored it, squeezing my eyes shut, hoping whoever was out there would just leave. Then 3 more knocks, harder this time. "This is your test. Answer the door." I didn't want to. I knew something was wrong, but it felt like I wasn't in control of my own body anymore. My hand reached for the doorknob, trembling as I unlocked it. I pulled the door open a crack, just enough to peek outside. No one was there. I let out a shaky breath and quickly shut the door. I backed away, my hands shaking, and that's when I saw it. Something had been slipped under the door. It was a plain white envelope with no markings, no return address, nothing. I hesitated for a second, then picked it up, my fingers trembling. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, feeling like I was about to read something I'd regret. In neat, typed letters, it read, "You've been chosen. Follow the instructions or face the consequences. I stared at the note, my mind racing. Instructions? What instructions? I turned the paper over, hoping for some kind of clue, but there was nothing, just those cold, ominous words. And then, like clockwork, the voice came back, louder this time. Look at your phone. I scrambled to grab it off the coffee table. There was a new message from an unknown number. Walk to the corner of Maple and 5th. Don't bring anything with you. Don't tell anyone. If you don't show up in 15 minutes, we'll know. I dropped the phone like it burned my hand. What the hell was this? Was this some kind of twisted prank? A cult initiation? I didn't care. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going to let these voices control me. But the longer I stood there, staring at that message, the more it gnawed at me. The whispers had turned into a roar inside my head, demanding that I follow through, that I go to the location. And then, my phone buzzed again. Another message. We see you. Don't make us come to you. I whipped my head toward the window, and sure enough, the man was still there. But now, he was standing closer, much closer. He was right at the edge of my property, staring up at me with those empty eyes. I didn't have a choice. Grabbing my jacket, I slipped outside into the cold night air. The street was eerily quiet, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. I made my way to the corner of Maple and 5th, my pulse pounding in my ears. And there, waiting for me, was a black car. No lights, no engine running, just sitting there. The back door opened, and the voice whispered once again, calm and confident. Get in. Your test begins now. I stood frozen on the corner, staring at the open car door, like it was a gateway to something far worse than the voices in my head. The street was completely silent, not a single soul in sight. It was like the entire world had disappeared, leaving just me, the car, and the command that echoed in my mind. Get in. I don't know why I moved. My legs carried me forward before my mind even made the decision. It was like being on autopilot, except I wasn't the one controlling the movements anymore. I slid into the back seat, the leather cold against my skin. The door shut behind me with a soft click, trapping me inside. The interior of the car was pitch black. I couldn't even make out the driver. I tried to look ahead, but all I could see was the faint outline of the steering wheel. The silence was unbearable. I didn't know what I was expecting. A conversation, an explanation, something. But the driver didn't say a word. The car started moving, rolling slowly down the street. The city lights flickered past the windows, casting strange shadows across my face. I tried to piece together what was happening, but my thoughts were tangled in knots. Why had I gotten into this car? What was this test they kept talking about? The deeper I fell into the collective, the less sense anything made. I wasn't in control anymore, not fully. That much was clear. After what felt like hours, the car finally stopped. I hadn't even been paying attention to where we were going, but now that we had arrived, I realized we were in the middle of nowhere. A dirt road stretched ahead, lined with tall, crooked trees that twisted in the wind. The door clicked open on its own. Get out, the voice whispered in my head. I hesitated for a second, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but I already knew I didn't have a choice. I stepped out of the car and found myself standing at the edge of the woods. The air was colder here, biting at my skin, and there was a strange, metallic taste in the air, like blood. The car pulled away, its tires crunching on the gravel, and just like that, I was alone. Or so I thought. From the darkness of the trees, I saw movement. At first, it was just a flicker, something small darting between the branches. Then, I noticed more figures, barely visible in the shadows. They were surrounding me, staying just out of sight, but close enough that I could feel their presence. I tried to step back, but the voice returned, calm and cold. Stay where you are. So, I did. The figures stepped forward, one by one, emerging from the trees. They wore black hoods, their faces obscured by masks that reflected the moonlight. They stood in a circle around me, silent, watching. The leader, if that's what he was, came closer, his mask inches from my face. It wasn't a mask like you'd see on Halloween or at some cheap costume store. It was crafted from something strange, almost organic, like skin stretched over bone. And the eyes weren't painted on. They were real, staring right at me from behind the mask. He spoke, but not with his mouth. The words echoed in my head, sharp and cutting. The collective has chosen you. Do you accept? I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything other than stand there and let this nightmare unfold, but I couldn't. The voice had buried itself so deep in my mind that it had taken over. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Do you accept? He repeated, the pressure in my skull building until it felt like my head would explode. I don't know why, but I nodded. I didn't want to, but it was like the act of refusing wasn't an option anymore. The figures around me moved closer, their hands reaching out, each one placing a cold, gloved palm on my skin, my arms, my shoulders, the back of my neck. And then I heard it. Not just the voice of the leader, but all of them. Thousands of whispers flooded my brain all at once, thoughts that weren't mine, images that didn't belong to me, memories of people I had never met. I could feel them, every single one of them, slipping into my mind like a virus, taking root and spreading. I was part of them now. The voices weren't just inside my head, they were my head. I could feel myself unraveling, losing grip on my own identity. I wasn't me anymore. I was them. But then, in the middle of all that chaos, one voice cut through. It was quieter, but clear enough to stand out among the noise. It wasn't like the others. It was urgent, scared. You have to get out. This isn't a test, it's a trap. I tried to focus on it, but it slipped away just as quickly as it had come. The other voices drowned it out again, pulling me deeper into the collective. The leader stepped back, breaking the physical connection. The others did the same, retreating into the shadows, but their presence was still there, in my mind. They were always going to be there. The leader tilted his head, his eerie eyes locking onto mine. You're ready for your final test. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know, but at that point, I wasn't sure if I had a choice anymore. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the woods. The others followed, their forms melting into the darkness, leaving me alone again. Except I wasn't alone. The whispers never stopped. The drive back was a blur. I don't even remember getting into the car. 1 second I was standing in that cold, dark clearing, and the next, I was back in my apartment, sitting on the floor, staring at my phone. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. They never left me alone, not even for a second. It was like my thoughts were fighting for space in my own mind, and I was losing. I tried to block them out, tried to focus on anything else, but nothing worked. Every few minutes, they'd interrupt my thoughts with random commands or strange phrases, some of which I couldn't even understand. It wasn't just English anymore. It was like my brain was picking up signals from all over the world, from different languages, different people, none of them mine. I spent the next few days in a daze. I barely left my apartment, just pacing back and forth, hoping the voices would quiet down. They didn't. They only got worse. Sometimes I'd hear screams, distant and distorted, like they were coming from underwater. Other times, I'd hear laughter, but not the kind you'd want to hear. It was manic, unhinged. I tried turning my phone off, thinking maybe the connection had something to do with it. But the moment I powered it down, the voices became angry. The pressure in my head spiked, and I doubled over in pain, clutching my temples. They weren't just inside my mind anymore. They were controlling me. You cannot disconnect. That was the clearest message I'd received in days. It was their warning. I wasn't allowed to leave, wasn't allowed to block them out. I was part of the collective now, whether I liked it or not. And then, just as suddenly as they'd started, the voices went quiet. For the first time in what felt like weeks, there was silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I should have felt relieved. But instead, dread curled in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. The stillness wasn't a reprieve. It was the calm before the storm. That's when the knocking started. 3 knocks, just like before. Slow, deliberate. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at the door. Whoever, or whatever, was out there. I knew they weren't here for a friendly visit. I didn't want to answer it, but I already knew I didn't have a choice. I walked to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the knob. Just like before, I opened it a crack, peeking out into the dimly lit hallway. No one was there. But this time, there was something different. Sitting just outside my door was a small black box. Plain, with no markings, no label, just a box. Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I reached down and picked it up. It was light, barely weighing anything at all, but there was something about it that felt off. I carried it into the apartment, setting it on the coffee table and stepping back. I didn't want to open it. Whatever was inside, I knew it couldn't be good. But the voices, they were back. Not whispering, not commanding, but just watching, waiting. Open it. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was the test, the final test. I knew that much, but I also knew that once I opened that box, there was no going back. Slowly, I reached for the lid, my fingers brushing the smooth surface of the box. I hesitated for a moment longer, then lifted it. Inside was a small device. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary USB stick, but it was sleek, matte black, with no markings or branding. Just a single, pulsing red light at the end. The moment I touched it, the voices surged back into my head, louder than ever before. Merge. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to plug it in, to connect, to complete whatever twisted experiment they were running. My hand hovered over the USB for what felt like an eternity, my mind battling itself. Part of me terrified of what would happen next, the other part already resigned to my fate. Without realizing it, I had already stood up and walked over to my computer. My body wasn't mine anymore. I was just a passenger now, along for the ride. I plugged the USB into the port. The screen flickered for a moment, then went black. And in that darkness, something shifted. I could feel it, like a door had been opened, not just in the computer, but in my mind. The whispers returned, but this time they weren't disjointed, scattered thoughts. They were synchronized, like a choir, all speaking in unison, filling my mind with a single message. The merge is complete. I blinked, staring at the black screen. There was nothing there, no sign that the device had done anything at all. But I could feel it. The collective was no longer separate from me. I wasn't just hearing them anymore. I was part of them. Their thoughts were my thoughts. Their memories were mine. It was like a floodgate had opened, and everything they knew, everything they had seen, came rushing into my mind all at once. I saw things, places I had never been, people I had never met, memories that didn't belong to me, but now felt as real as my own. And in those memories, I saw them. The collective wasn't just a group of random strangers connected through some twisted dark web forum. It was something else, something ancient, something far bigger than I could comprehend. The voices were no longer a burden. They were a part of me now, guiding me, showing me the way. But then, just as I began to understand the scope of what I had become, I felt a shift, a presence, something darker, more powerful than anything I had sensed before. The leader. He was coming. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel him getting closer. The leader. The one who had first spoken to me through the collective. The one who had orchestrated everything. He wasn't just a voice in my head anymore. He was coming, physically coming for me. The air in my apartment felt different, thick, suffocating. The kind of heaviness you only feel before a storm hits, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe right. I couldn't think. The collective was still inside me, whispering, guiding, but their presence was tense. Even they were afraid. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, for him to arrive. My mind buzzed with 1,000 different thoughts, none of them my own. I felt like I was drowning in the voices, overwhelmed by their presence. They weren't just inside me anymore. They were taking me. Then there was a sound. Not the knock from before, not even the slow creak of footsteps. It was the hum of static, like white noise, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was the sound of the leader, drawing closer. I could hear him now, not just as a whisper, but as a low, distorted rumble at the edge of my consciousness. The lights flickered, and I felt a sharp pain in my head, like something was trying to force its way in. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring. I could see things, his memories. They weren't like the others I had seen through the collective. These were darker, older, more twisted. I saw him standing in a room filled with old, outdated computers, surrounded by shadowy figures. I saw him inserting the same USB I had, his face blank, his eyes void of emotion. And then I saw the truth. The leader wasn't just part of the collective. He was the collective. He had created it, spread it across the dark web, drawing people in, connecting their minds until they weren't individuals anymore, until they were part of him. That's when I realized what the merge really meant. I wasn't just joining the collective. I was becoming another piece of the leader, another fragment of his consciousness. I wasn't me anymore. Suddenly, the static grew louder, filling my apartment with an unbearable buzz. The walls seemed to pulse, vibrating with the sound. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was too late. He was here. The door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges, though I never saw anyone turn the handle. It just opened, like it had been waiting for this moment. And then, through the doorway, I saw him, the leader. He wasn't what I expected. I thought he'd be a man, someone normal, just with too much power over the collective. But this thing wasn't human. His face was pale, stretched too thin over his skull, his eyes sunken deep into his sockets. There was something ancient about him, like he had been around far longer than any person should be. His presence filled the room, oppressive and suffocating, and I knew that I couldn't run. I couldn't fight him. He stepped inside, his gaze locking onto mine, and for the first time, the whispers in my head stopped. It was just me and him. Silence. The leader didn't speak, not out loud. He didn't need to. His voice was inside me now, louder and more terrifying than the whispers had ever been. The merge is complete. You belong to me. I wanted to scream, to resist, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, my mind tangled in his thoughts. I could feel myself slipping away, becoming part of him, just like all the others who had joined the collective. He was consuming me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. You will serve the collective. His voice echoed through my skull, rattling every corner of my mind. I was losing myself, fading into him. The memories, the voices, they weren't mine anymore. They were his, all his. But then, just as I thought I was gone, that faint voice from before came back, the one that had warned me. It was small, almost too quiet to hear, but it cut through the leader's overwhelming presence. You can fight this. It's not too late. I didn't know where it was coming from, but it gave me the strength to push back, to resist. The leader's grip on me faltered, just for a second, and I took the chance. I fought with everything I had left, trying to claw my way back to myself, to break free from his control. The leader snarled, his eyes narrowing as he realized what was happening. The static grew louder, more violent, filling my head with white noise, but I kept pushing. I didn't want to be a part of him. I didn't want to disappear. And then, in a sudden burst of clarity, the connection snapped. The leader staggered back, his form flickering like a bad signal on a television screen. His face twisted in rage, but I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I ran. I bolted out the door, down the stairs, and into the street, not stopping until I was halfway across town, my lungs burning and my mind reeling. The voices were gone. The connection was severed, but I knew it wasn't over. The leader was still out there, and so was the collective. They had marked me, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. I don't know how long I can keep running. I don't know how long I can stay me. But for now, I'm free. I found a dark web experiment that lets people upload their souls. I think my soul was stolen. Okay, so this is going to sound insane, but I swear it's all true. I know it sounds like some conspiracy theory crap, but I need to get this off my chest. Something's really wrong with me, and I think it has to do with a website I found on the dark web. Please, just hear me out. So, a couple of months ago, I was hanging out with my buddy Jake. We're both pretty into tech stuff. Nothing crazy, just some light hacking, getting into backdoor servers, mostly for fun, nothing illegal. You know how it is. We both were into the whole dark web thing, just browsing around, trying to see if we could find anything interesting. Mostly, it's boring. People always think it's just this black hole of horror, but 90% of the time it's just drug forums or scam sites pretending to sell weapons. But one night, things got weird. Jake had been messing around with some deeper level access points and found a link. Now, usually, you don't just click random links on the dark web. That's how you end up with a bricked computer or worse. But this link was different. It didn't look like some shady site. It was clean, professional looking. The title was Transcendence, Upload Your Soul. I laughed it off at first. It sounded like some new age spiritual BS, but Jake was intrigued. Dude, he said, you have to see this. Now, before I go any further, I want to make one thing clear. We didn't mean for things to go this far. At the time, it was just curiosity, pure, stupid curiosity. So, we clicked it. The page opened up with this stark white background, super minimalist, with a single prompt in the middle. It said, "What if you could leave your body behind?" Underneath that was a button that just said, "Begin experiment." Man, this is dumb, I remember saying, but Jake was already too into it. Let's see where this goes, he insisted. I don't know what possessed me to go along with it. Maybe it was the late hour, or maybe it was just that weird energy you get when you're too tired and everything feels surreal. Either way, we clicked begin experiment. Suddenly, the page shifted. A loading bar popped up, and we both just stared at it, waiting. After what felt like forever, it took us to another screen. This time, it asked for some information. Basic stuff: name, age, place of birth. I started feeling uneasy, like we were signing up for some cult mailing list or something, but Jake shrugged it off. It's probably just for some psychological experiment, he said. They need to make it feel real. The thing that stood out to me, though, was the last box on the form. It asked for soul identification code. We had no idea what that was, obviously, but beneath the box was a little button that said, Generate ID. Jake clicked it. The screen went black for a second, and this loud hum came from our speakers, like some kind of weird feedback noise. Then, a string of random numbers and letters popped up on the screen. It was long, like way longer than a social security number. Beneath it, the button had changed to say, Upload. What the hell is this? I asked. My stomach was in knots by now, and the whole thing just felt wrong. Jake grinned, that same cocky grin he always gets when he thinks he's about to pull off something cool. Dude, this is probably some immersive game or ARG. Relax. I wanted to close the tab right then and there, but Jake was already leaning forward, hand hovering over the mouse. And before I could say anything else, he clicked upload. That's when everything went south. The computer froze for a second. The hum returned, louder this time. It was so loud that I swear I could feel it vibrating through the table. Then the screen flickered, and we were both staring at ourselves. I'm not joking. The page now showed 2 figures, and they looked like us. Well, sort of. They were like shadows of us, standing side by side, only it wasn't perfect. There were details missing. Our faces were blank. And the weirdest part, the figures were slightly distorted, like we were looking at ourselves through warped glass. What the hell? I whispered. My voice felt too loud, like it didn't belong in the room anymore. Jake didn't say anything. He was staring at the screen, wide-eyed. Then, beneath the figures, text started to scroll. It read, Uploading in progress. Please wait. I was done. I reached for the power button on the computer, but the second my finger touched it, everything went dark. The lights in the room, the computer, the monitor, everything just shut off at once. We were plunged into total silence and pitch blackness. I couldn't even hear Jake breathing next to me, and for a second I thought I'd gone deaf or something. Then the power came back. The lights flickered on, the computer whirred back to life, and the monitor lit up again. But the page was gone. Everything was normal. Desktop, icons, everything. It was like the whole thing never happened. Jake and I just sat there, staring at the screen, both too freaked out to say a word. I remember feeling this heavy pit in my stomach, like I'd just touched something I shouldn't have, something that didn't belong to our world. Finally, Jake broke the silence. What? What the hell was that? His voice shook. I could tell he was trying to play it cool, but he was just as freaked out as I was. I didn't answer. I didn't have any answers. I just knew that whatever we had just done, it wasn't some game or prank. It felt real. Too real. That night, I went home, trying to shake off the feeling that something had shifted. But I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadowy versions of us, distorted and incomplete. And then, things started to get weird. Real weird. I didn't sleep that night. I kept seeing those shadow figures in my head every time I closed my eyes, just standing there, faceless and still. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were wrong, like they were us, but not really. It was hard to explain, but the more I thought about it, the worse it got. The next morning, things got stranger. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how off I felt. You know when you have a fever, and everything seems a little too bright, a little too sharp. That's the best way I can describe it. My body felt heavy, like I was dragging myself through the day. My reflection in the bathroom mirror even looked dull, like my skin had lost some of its color. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe I was coming down with something. Maybe it was just a lack of sleep. But then I started noticing the weirdest things. I went to grab my phone that morning to check my messages, but it wasn't where I usually leave it. It was on the kitchen counter, which was weird because I always charge it on my nightstand. I couldn't remember leaving it there. Small, right? But stuff like that kept happening. Throughout the day, I'd find things out of place. My wallet was in my jacket, but I swore I had left it in my bag. My car keys were on the kitchen table, not in the bowl by the door. Little things, but they started adding up. Then Jake called. He sounded different. At first, I thought maybe he was just as freaked out as I was, but there was something else in his voice that made my skin crawl. It was flat, almost robotic, like he was going through the motions of a conversation without actually feeling anything. He asked me if I was okay, but the way he said it, man, it was like he didn't care about the answer. "I'm fine, I guess," I replied, trying to match his tone, but I couldn't shake this uncomfortable feeling. "What about you? You've been feeling weird?" There was a pause, long enough for me to check if the call had dropped. "Nah, man, I'm good," Jake finally said. But there was no emotion in his voice at all, just this weird, dead calm. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, my hand still gripping it tight. I don't know why, but something about that call made me feel uneasy. Like I was talking to Jake, but not really Jake. Like someone was pretending to be him. It sounds stupid, but that's the only way I can describe it. I tried to push the feeling aside, tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid after what happened last night. But then, things got worse. That night, I had the strangest dream. At least, I think it was a dream. In the dream, I was standing in my living room, but everything was wrong. The walls were too far apart, like the room had stretched somehow, and there was this low humming sound in the air, just like the one from that site, vibrating in my skull. In the middle of the room stood two shadowy figures, just like the ones Jake and I had seen on the screen. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel them watching me, even though they had no faces. Then, one of them stepped forward, and I swear it felt like the air got sucked out of the room. It was like staring into a black hole, like it wasn't just a shadow, but something worse, something that didn't belong in our world. As it came closer, I tried to move, to run, but my legs were frozen. It reached out, its hand, or whatever it was, stretched toward me, and just as it was about to touch me, I woke up, gasping, sweating, heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. But when I looked around, something wasn't right. My room didn't feel like my room. It looked the same, but it felt different. Like it was a perfect copy of my room, but not quite. Like I was still in the dream, only I wasn't. I jumped out of bed and tried to shake the feeling off. Maybe it was just the aftermath of a bad dream, but when I stepped out of my bedroom, I swear to God, the hallway looked longer. I know it sounds nuts, but I'm not joking. It was like someone had stretched my entire apartment just a few inches too long. I spent the rest of that day feeling on edge, like something was watching me from just outside my field of vision. Whenever I turned around, I'd swear I saw movement, just a flicker of something dark in the corner of my eye, but every time I looked directly, there was nothing. It wasn't until later that night when I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. I was looking in the bathroom mirror, trying to shake off the creeping paranoia, when I caught sight of my reflection. I really looked at myself, and there was something off about it. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it, but the longer I stared, the more I realized my eyes. They weren't mine. I don't know how to explain it, but you know how when you look in a mirror, there's this connection. You know it's you looking back. That feeling was gone. My eyes looked empty, blank, like the spark that made me me had vanished. I stumbled back from the mirror, heart pounding. Something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my phone and called Jake. It went straight to voicemail. Panic started to set in. I called him again. Same thing. I texted him, and after what felt like forever, I finally got a reply. "Don't worry, everything's fine." But the message felt off. It didn't sound like him. And worse, when I checked the message again a few minutes later, the timestamp had changed. It now said I had received it 2 hours before I even sent the text. That's when I knew, whatever we'd done on that website, it wasn't just some weird prank or fake experiment. It had done something to us, and I had this horrible, gnawing feeling in my gut that whatever it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because it wasn't just my mind that felt different. It was like a part of me had gone missing, and I wasn't sure how much time I had left to find it. After that text, I tried to act like everything was normal. Just get through the day, pretend I wasn't losing my mind, even though I could feel something inside me slipping. But it didn't work. I couldn't shake that eerie feeling that something was wrong, not just with me, but with everything around me. It was like the world had shifted just a little bit to the left, and I was the only one who noticed. The next day, I went to check on Jake. I needed to talk to him face to face, needed to make sure he was okay, because that last message was gnawing at me. The timestamp thing had seriously freaked me out, and I needed to see him, to hear his voice in person. So, I drove over to his place. Now, Jake lives about 20 minutes away, a quick drive down the highway, and I'd been to his house a million times before. But as I got closer to his street, I felt this cold dread settle over me, like the air had dropped a few degrees. The houses looked the same, but I swear they all felt off, like they weren't really houses, just sets in some kind of twisted stage play. I know it sounds crazy, but every window I passed, I felt like someone, or something, was watching me. When I finally pulled up to Jake's house, I noticed something that immediately made my skin crawl. His car was in the driveway, but the front door was slightly open. Not wide open, just barely cracked, like someone had left in a hurry. Jake was always super paranoid about security. He never left the door open, not even a little. I sat there for a minute, just staring at it, debating whether I should even go inside. But I had to know if he was okay. So, I got out of the car and walked up to the door. As I pushed it open, that same humming sound from the website rang faintly in my ears. It was so low I almost thought I was imagining it. The house was dark. No lights, no sound. Just this heavy, suffocating quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I called out for Jake, but my voice felt swallowed by the silence. I made my way through the house, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the hardwood floor. Everything was in its place. His shoes by the door, the TV remote on the coffee table, his laptop open on the couch. But there was no sign of him. The whole place felt abandoned, like he had just up and vanished, leaving everything behind. I headed upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting, hoping, to find him there. Maybe asleep, maybe sick. But his room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, like it hadn't been touched in days. And then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. His phone was sitting on his nightstand, screen still lit up. That wasn't what freaked me out, though. It was what was on the screen. There was a single message open on the screen, but it wasn't a text. It was that same website. The one we'd clicked on together. The same white background. The same minimalist design. But now it just said one word. Complete. I stared at the screen, my brain spinning, trying to make sense of it. What did it mean? Complete. What had we completed? And then I heard something downstairs, a soft creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. For a second, I thought maybe Jake had come back. Maybe he'd just been in another room and didn't hear me calling for him. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Whatever was in this house with me, it wasn't Jake. I slowly backed out of the room, my eyes locked on the dark hallway that led to the stairs. I was trying to be quiet, trying not to make any noise, but the boards beneath my feet creaked with every step. As I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. There, at the bottom of the staircase, was a figure. It stood perfectly still, shrouded in shadow, but I could make out the vague shape of a person. For a second, I thought maybe it was Jake after all. But something about it wasn't right. The figure was too tall, too still, like it wasn't breathing, like it was just waiting. "Jake?" I whispered, but the figure didn't respond. And then it moved. Not like a person moves, but in this jerky, unnatural way, like it was glitching, skipping frames. 1 second, it was at the bottom of the stairs. The next, it was halfway up. My heart slammed against my ribs, and before I even realized what I was doing, I turned and bolted. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I flew down the stairs and burst through the front door, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. When I looked back at the house, the figure was gone. The door was still cracked open, but the figure, whatever it had been, was nowhere in sight. I jumped into my car and peeled out of there as fast as I could. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely grip the wheel. I didn't stop driving until I was back at my place, where I sat in the car for what felt like hours, trying to calm down. Jake was gone. I didn't know where, but I knew whatever that thing in his house was, it wasn't him. Over the next few days, I tried to reach out to him. Texts, calls, emails. I even tried messaging him on social media, but there was nothing. No response. His phone went straight to voicemail, and his social media accounts hadn't been updated. It was like he'd disappeared off the face of the earth. But then, about a week later, I got a message from him. Well, from his number at least. "I'm fine. Don't come back." That was it. Just those 2 sentences. But the thing that really freaked me out? The timestamp. The message said it had been sent 3 days before I even got it. It didn't make sense. None of this did. I started digging online, trying to find anything I could about that website, Transcendence or Upload Your Soul. I scoured forums, Reddit threads, dark web boards. Nothing. It was like the site didn't exist, like it had just appeared and vanished without a trace. The only thing I found were vague mentions of some deep web experiments, whispers about people disappearing after participating in certain tests. But there were no concrete details, no names, no real evidence. It was like chasing a ghost, and the worst part, I could feel it happening to me too. I wasn't just forgetting things anymore. It was like parts of me were being erased. My memories, my emotions, they were slipping away. Some days, I'd wake up and not recognize myself in the mirror. I'd stare at my own reflection, trying to remember what I was supposed to feel. But the spark was gone. It was like I was becoming hollow, just like those shadowy figures we saw on that site. I'm scared. Scared that I'm next. scared that whatever happened to Jake is going to happen to me. And the worst part, I think it's already started. I wish I could say I handled everything after that with a clear head. I didn't. After that last message from Jake, something inside me snapped. I was done pretending this was some weird prank or just a bad dream. It was real, and I was losing control over it. Or maybe over myself. The worst part was, I could feel it happening, little by little. It's hard to describe, but imagine knowing you're forgetting something important, like you're losing grip on reality and can't do anything to stop it. It's like sand slipping through your fingers. One day, I woke up and didn't remember what I had for dinner the night before. That's not so strange, right? But then I couldn't remember if I'd even eaten at all. I couldn't remember if I'd seen my parents in weeks or months. Time didn't feel right anymore. Everything started to blur together. I'd catch myself staring off into space for what felt like minutes, but when I'd check the clock, hours had passed. I'd go to bed and wake up not knowing what day it was. And then there were the gaps in my memory. Not just little things either. Whole conversations, events, chunks of my day just gone. And when I tried to focus, to remember, I'd get this sharp pain behind my eyes, like my brain was being punished for trying too hard. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I stopped feeling like myself altogether. I started noticing that I'd do things without even realizing it. Like, I'd find myself standing in the middle of my living room, staring blankly at the wall, and not remember why I'd gotten up in the first place. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find myself standing at my front door, hand on the doorknob, like I was about to leave. I don't sleepwalk. I never have. But there I was, in the dark, with no idea how I'd gotten there. And then there was the reflection. I stopped looking in mirrors after a while. Every time I did, it was like I was looking at a stranger. It was still me, technically, but something about my face just felt off. The expression, the way my eyes moved. It was like I was watching a puppet, like I was inside myself, but not the one pulling the strings. I don't even know how much time passed before the next weird thing happened. I'd lost track of days, maybe even weeks at that point. But one morning, I woke up to find my computer on. That was strange enough because I distinctly remember shutting it down the night before. But when I went to check the screen, it was already loaded onto that same website, the one from the dark web, Transcendence. Only this time, the screen wasn't asking for information. There were no figures, no prompts, just a message. Congratulations, Phase 2 is complete. Await further instructions. I stared at it, heart hammering in my chest, unable to move. What the hell did it mean? Phase 2? I didn't sign up for anything beyond that one night with Jake, but here I was, with this cryptic message on my screen. Await further instructions? What did that mean? What were they going to do next? I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't stop whatever was happening. The sight, the experiment, it was already inside me. I could feel it in every fiber of my being, like some invisible parasite crawling through my mind, hollowing me out. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, it was worse. The dream started like before, in my living room, with everything stretched and wrong. But this time, the shadows weren't just standing there. They were moving, slowly, creeping toward me, their forms twisting and glitching as they came closer. There were more of them now, 5, maybe 6. And this time, they had faces. They were mine. Each of them wore my face, but not quite right. The expressions were warped, their eyes too wide, their smiles too sharp, like a funhouse mirror version of me. I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was frozen in place as they closed in, surrounding me, their distorted faces looming closer, filling my vision. And then, as they reached out, their hands brushing against my skin, I felt it, this horrible, sinking feeling, like something was being ripped away from me, like they were pulling me apart piece by piece, taking something from me that I couldn't get back. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. But even though I was awake, the feeling didn't leave. I sat in bed, clutching the sheets, breathing hard, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, but it felt so real, too real. And the worst part, I didn't feel whole anymore, like whatever they'd taken in the dream was really gone. That's when I knew, without a doubt, that my soul, my actual soul, was being stripped away. I tried to research soul theft, soul transfers, anything that might help me figure out what was happening. I dove deep into obscure occult forums, spiritualist websites, paranormal blogs, anywhere that might have an answer. Most of it was just noise, people talking about astral projection or past lives, stuff that felt like nonsense. But one post caught my attention. It was buried deep in a forum I found on an encrypted server. The post was old, years old, but it mentioned a similar experiment, something about an upload process where participants claimed their souls were being siphoned off into a digital space. The post was vague, but the user who wrote it described the same feelings I had: the loss of identity, the growing hollowness, the sense that something was taking pieces of them. And then the user disappeared. The last message they left was a single line: "They're coming. I'm almost gone." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what this phase 2 means, or what further instructions they're talking about, but I'm terrified of what's coming next. It feels like every day I'm losing more of myself. My memories are slipping faster. Sometimes I catch myself doing things I don't remember deciding to do. I'll find myself halfway through cooking a meal, not knowing why I started, or I'll look at my phone and see texts I don't remember sending. It's like I'm on autopilot, but I'm not the one driving. And then, just this morning, I noticed something that nearly made me throw up. I was brushing my teeth, trying to keep up with some kind of routine to feel normal, and I glanced in the mirror, just out of habit. For a split second, everything looked fine. Just me, standing there, toothbrush in hand. But then, my reflection smiled. I didn't. I wasn't smiling, but in the mirror, my face twisted into this eerie, too wide grin, like it was mocking me. I stumbled back, dropping the toothbrush, heart pounding. I blinked, and it was gone. My reflection was normal again, just staring back at me, but I could still feel that twisted grin etched into my brain. I don't know how much longer I have. I feel like I'm unraveling, like my mind is slipping further and further away. I don't know what's going to happen when they decide to complete the next phase, but I'm starting to think that once they're done, there won't be anything left of me. Just a hollow shell. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was on the edge of something, like my mind was dangling over a cliff, and if I let myself fall asleep, I'd lose myself completely. I started keeping the lights on at night, pacing my apartment, like it would help me hold on to my thoughts. But no matter what I did, the feeling of being watched never left. It was worse than just paranoia now. I could feel it. Something was here, with me. Not just in the shadows or in my reflection, but inside me, like a passenger I couldn't see, slowly taking control. Every now and then, I'd catch myself pausing in the middle of doing something, staring into space. And when I woke up from those moments, I had no idea what I'd been thinking about. Whole minutes, sometimes hours, were vanishing, slipping through my fingers like water. Then, 3 days ago, it got worse. I was sitting at my desk, trying to distract myself with some mindless task, when my computer screen flickered. I hadn't touched anything, but suddenly, the screen blinked, and that website, Transcendence, popped up again, like it had forced itself back into my world. This time, there was no loading screen, no prompt, just one line of text in the middle of the screen. Final phase initiated. I felt a wave of cold rush over me. My hand started shaking, and I slammed the laptop shut, hoping that would make it stop. But the hum, that low, bone-deep vibration that I'd heard the first night, filled the room again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the computer. It was coming from me. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, in my head, like my whole body was starting to glitch. My vision blurred for a moment, and I thought I might pass out. I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the sink to steady myself, and when I looked up into the mirror, my heart nearly stopped. My reflection wasn't me anymore. It looked like me. Same face, same clothes, but the person in the mirror was smiling, that same horrible, unnatural grin I'd seen before. And their eyes, my eyes, were empty, completely void of anything human. The smile stretched wider as I stared, frozen in place, watching as my reflection leaned in, closer to the glass, closer to me. And then it spoke. It didn't move its lips. The voice didn't even come from the mirror. It echoed inside my head, like a thought I didn't put there. "You're almost gone." I stumbled back, nearly falling over, and my reflection stayed there, pressed against the glass, smiling. My heart pounded in my chest, and I bolted out of the bathroom, running into the living room like I could escape it. But it was no use. The voice followed me. It was inside me now. "You invited us in." I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed my phone and tried calling Jake again. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. But I needed to hear someone's voice. His voice, even if I knew something wasn't right with him either. It rang once, twice, and then the line clicked. Silence. "Jake?" My voice came out as a whisper, shaky and weak. And then, on the other end of the line, I heard that same low hum. The same hum that had been inside my head for days now, vibrating through my bones. And then Jake spoke, but it wasn't really him. It was that same flat, robotic tone I'd heard before, only this time, it wasn't pretending to be human. "You're next." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Everything around me felt unreal, like the walls of my apartment were starting to melt, like I was slipping further and further from reality. I could barely think straight anymore. My thoughts were jumbled, fragmented, like someone had taken scissors to my brain and was cutting out pieces at random. I don't remember much of what happened next. I just remember pacing, then sitting on the floor, trying to breathe, trying to stay in control. But that voice, the one that wasn't mine, kept whispering in the back of my mind. It kept telling me to let go, to surrender. "It's almost over," it whispered. "You'll feel better when it's done." I don't know how long I stayed like that, curled up on the floor, trying to block out the sound. Hours, days. Everything felt like it was folding in on itself, collapsing into this endless, suffocating darkness. And then, it all stopped. The humming, the whispering, the dread, everything just went silent. When I finally opened my eyes, I was back in my bed. I didn't remember getting there. My apartment looked the same, no signs of anything being out of place. But something was different, something was off. At first, I thought it was over, that maybe I'd somehow broken free from whatever had been happening. But then, as I got up and went to the mirror, I realized the truth. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time, it didn't move. I raised my hand. My reflection didn't. I smiled, but the person in the mirror just stared back at me, expressionless, like it was waiting. My breath hitched, and I stepped back, my mind racing, trying to understand what I was seeing. And then it moved. The reflection, the one that wasn't me, slowly tilted its head, like it was studying me. Its lips curled into that familiar, horrible grin, and my stomach twisted into knots. I wasn't in control anymore. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel it. I could feel something else inside me, pulling the strings, moving my body, controlling my actions. It was subtle at first, just a strange delay between what I wanted to do and what my body actually did. But now, it's getting stronger. I can barely tell what's me and what's it anymore. I think the final phase is almost done. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm scared, more scared than I've ever been in my life. I'm losing the last pieces of myself. My memories are slipping. My thoughts feel like they're being overwritten. And my reflection watches me now. I can feel it staring, even when I'm not looking. It's always there, just waiting for the moment when I finally lose the last bit of control and it takes over completely. I don't think I'll be me much longer. I don't think I'm even writing this anymore. My hands are typing, but they don't feel like mine. My thoughts, they're not really my thoughts, are they? Whoever, or whatever, is reading this, remember this. Don't go looking for that website. Don't try to find transcendence. I thought it was just a game, just some dark web nonsense. But it's real. It's so real. And if you go looking, they'll find you too. They'll find you. And you won't be able to stop them. I didn't. I was paid to explore a secret section of the dark web. It contains memories that don't belong to me. All right, before you guys tell me I was an idiot for even considering it, let me explain. I've always been one of those people who skims the surface of weird stuff online, you know? I've watched all the creepy YouTube videos, read about strange Reddit threads, and maybe dabbled a little too close to the deep web on more than one occasion, just out of curiosity. But nothing too intense. That was, until I got an offer that honestly sounded too good to be true. It was about 2 months ago. I had this side gig as a freelance coder, picking up random jobs from sketchy forums and private clients, mostly under the table stuff. I know, it sounds sketchy already. But this gig, man, this was different. Some guy with the username Cade9 hits me up through a private message on a forum I frequent. He knew things about me, like things I hadn't shared publicly, my coding skills, my browsing habits, even a few personal details that made me uncomfortable. I should have bailed right there, but the message didn't feel like a threat. It felt more like an invitation. Cade offered me $5,000, $5,000 for one night's work. The job, simple. He wanted me to explore a section of the deep web that he claimed no one else had access to. He even called it a hidden layer, like the dark web was an onion, and I'd been invited to peel back one of the last layers. I remember thinking, this sounds like a plot from a bad horror movie, but $5,000 for one night of clicking around. It sounded too good to pass up. The thing is, he wasn't vague about the dangers. He warned me, said the section wasn't illegal or filled with the usual deep web stuff. No hitmen, no drugs, no human trafficking. Instead, He described it as a place where things existed that shouldn't. At the time, I had no idea what the hell that meant, and honestly, I didn't care. The money was the only thing that mattered. I figured, at worst, I'd see some creepy videos or weird forums, and then I'd be out. I told myself, people blow $5,000 on vacations all the time. This is just a virtual trip. After a bit of back and forth, I agreed. The next day, Kate sent me a series of encrypted files with instructions on how to access this hidden layer. It was complex, but nothing too crazy for someone with my skills. All I had to do was install some custom software he provided, boot into a virtual machine, and follow a path he'd outlined to this specific network of hidden sites. Easy money, right? The night I decided to do it, I made sure my roommate was out of the house, just in case. Not that I was expecting anything dangerous to happen, but if you've ever been on the deep web, you know it feels different. The air in the room gets heavier, almost like the internet itself is pressing down on you. I booted everything up, entered the tunnel, and began my descent into whatever twisted part of the dark web this guy had found. At first, it was the usual weird stuff. Pages that didn't load properly, endless dead links, and forums filled with random code that looked like gibberish. But then, just as I was about to get bored and tell Cade his little experiment was a bust, I hit a page that loaded perfectly. It was a black screen with a single line of text at the top. "Welcome. You are not alone here." I paused for a second, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Something about that sentence felt off. But it wasn't enough to make me back out. Not yet. I clicked forward, and the screen shifted to a strange, minimalist interface with a list of memories written in simple, plain text. At least, that's what the titles made them sound like. They were labeled things like December 17th, 2002, the day she disappeared, April 9th, 1999, the night I should have died, November 11th, 2010, the thing in the basement. I laughed, thinking, okay, this is definitely some kind of interactive horror game or ARG. It had that vibe, you know, a list of creepy memories, each one sounding more disturbing than the last. But here's the thing, it didn't feel like fiction. The text wasn't dramatic or over the top, just factual, like someone documenting real events. I clicked on the first memory, December 17th, 2002, the day she disappeared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the screen flashed white, and I was no longer looking at my desktop. Instead, it felt like I was seeing someone else's memory from their perspective. Like, I wasn't just reading about it, I was living it. I was standing in an empty field, staring at an old farmhouse in the distance. There was this overwhelming sense of dread, like something horrible had happened here. The wind was howling, and I could hear faint whispers in the background, but they were too far away to understand. My heart started racing, and I had no idea why. I wasn't physically there, but it felt so real. I could feel the cold, hear the crunch of dead grass under my feet. It wasn't just a visual, it was sensory. Then I heard it. A girl's scream, sharp and sudden, piercing through the wind. My blood turned to ice. I wanted to move, to run towards the house, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't work. I was stuck, forced to stand there and watch as the door to the farmhouse creaked open slowly, revealing only darkness inside. Before I could even process what was happening, the screen blinked back to black, and I was back at my desktop, breathing heavily like I had just run a marathon. I stared at the list of memories, my hands shaking over the mouse. This wasn't some game. This wasn't a file or some trick. It was like I had stepped into someone's life. a life that wasn't mine. And for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had just experienced wasn't over. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. That field, that scream, it wasn't just in my head, my body remembered it, like it actually happened to me. I felt the cold wind on my skin, the panic in my chest, even though I hadn't moved from my chair. I closed my laptop, pushing it aside like it had burned me. I should have walked away right then. I mean, I had my money. The job was technically done, right? But something was gnawing at me. This feeling in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I had to know what was behind the rest of those memories. It wasn't just curiosity, though. It was something deeper, like I was being pulled into it. I tried to distract myself, watched TV, scrolled through my phone, even went for a walk. Nothing helped. The whole time, that list of memories kept playing in my mind, like they were calling me back. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, that it was all just some elaborate psychological trick or experiment designed to mess with my head. After all, the deep web is full of messed up stuff like that. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened my laptop again. I knew it was a bad idea, but by this point, the need to understand what was happening had overridden all sense of reason. It was like knowing you shouldn't press a red button, but needing to do it anyway, just to see what would happen. I logged back in. The black screen and the list of memories popped up again. That same minimalist interface. This time, I skipped the first one. I didn't need to relive that. My eyes scanned the list until they landed on the next entry. April 9th, 1999, the night I should have died. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the mouse. I knew, deep down, that whatever I was about to see wasn't going to be easy to forget. But, like an idiot, I clicked it. And just like before, everything went white. When my vision cleared, I was somewhere else. This time, I wasn't outside. I was in a car, sitting in the passenger seat. It was nighttime, and the car was speeding down a narrow road. The headlights illuminated the asphalt, but everything else was pitch black. The only sound was the engine roaring and the tires screeching around tight curves. I wasn't alone. There was someone driving next to me, but I couldn't turn my head to see them. It was like I was trapped inside this memory, only able to experience what the original person had experienced. My hands were clenched into fists, digging into the seat. My heart was racing again, but not because of the speed. It was something else, something worse. I could feel this growing sense of dread, like something horrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the driver spoke, but their voice was distorted, like a bad radio signal cutting in and out. "You sure about this?" the voice asked, but I couldn't answer. I didn't have control. It was like I was a passenger in someone else's body, along for the ride whether I wanted to be or not. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I knew somehow that they were smiling. The kind of smile that sends chills down your spine, even though you don't know why. There was something wrong with the whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The car swerved hard to the right, tires screeching, and the driver let out this low, unsettling laugh that made my skin crawl. We were speeding now, going faster than any sane person would on a road like this. Trees blurred past the windows, and the car started shaking like it was about to come apart. That's when I saw it, the edge of the road. No guardrails, just a steep drop-off into darkness. The driver didn't slow down. They didn't even flinch. The car kept hurtling toward the edge, and I could feel my pulse skyrocketing, every muscle in my body screaming to stop, to do something, anything. But I couldn't. I was just there, watching, helpless. Just before the car hit the edge, everything went silent. No sound from the engine, no wind, no road noise. It was like someone had muted the entire world. And then, nothing. The screen went black. I was back at my desktop again, gasping for breath, my hands trembling so hard I couldn't even grip the mouse. My eyes were glued to the black screen, waiting for something, anything, to explain what I'd just seen. But there was nothing. No follow-up, no clue, no answers. Just me, alone in my dark room, heart pounding, feeling like I'd just been inches away from death. The strange thing? It didn't feel like a dream or a game. It felt like it had really happened. Like, for a few minutes, I had lived through someone else's worst moment. The moment they should have died, but didn't. I pushed my chair back, feeling sick. My head was spinning, and my mouth was dry. There was no way I was going to open another memory after that. Not that night. I closed the laptop, shoved it under my bed, and stumbled into the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. That sense of dread, that awful certainty that what I had experienced wasn't just a memory, it was a warning. I crawled into bed, exhausted, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that road, felt that panic, heard that distorted voice laughing, and every time I tried to convince myself it was all just some elaborate hoax, I kept coming back to the same thought. What if it wasn't? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was still in that car, careening toward the edge, that eerie laughter echoing in my head. I thought about messaging Cade 9, telling him I was done, that I didn't want any part of whatever this was anymore. But when I reached for my phone, I realized I didn't even have a way to contact him. Everything had been through those encrypted messages. I hadn't even considered how weird that was before. It felt like I was in too deep already. The next day was a blur. I was exhausted, and everything felt off. I kept getting this weird sensation, like someone was watching me. I'd glance over my shoulder while making breakfast, or catch myself staring at a reflection in the window, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was never anyone there. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that it was just the creepy memories messing with me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. By the time night rolled around, the tension was unbearable. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on something else, but my mind kept drifting back to that list of memories. Why were they there? Why did they feel so real? And most importantly, who did they belong to? Against my better judgment, I opened my laptop again. The familiar black screen greeted me, along with that damn list. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, telling myself to close it, to just walk away. But then my eyes landed on the third memory. November 11th, 2010. The thing in the basement. I didn't want to click it. My hands were shaking as they hovered over the mouse. But once again, something inside me, some twisted curiosity or obsession, took over. And before I could stop myself, I clicked it. The now familiar white flash overtook the screen, and just like before, I was no longer in my room. This time, I was standing in a dimly lit basement. The concrete walls were damp, and there was this awful smell, like mold mixed with something metallic, something rotting. My skin prickled, and I realized I was holding a flashlight. Its weak beam barely cut through the darkness, revealing only the immediate area around me. I didn't know whose memory this was, but I could feel their fear, raw and electric, running through me. My breathing was shallow, shaky. My hands trembled, making the flashlight flicker against the walls. I tried to move, but again, I wasn't in control. I was just along for the ride. There was a staircase behind me, leading up to a door that looked like it belonged to an old house. It was barely open, a sliver of light casting down into the basement, but not enough to help. I felt this overwhelming urge to turn back. to leave, to get out of there. But the body I was in, the person who lived this memory, they had other plans. I turned slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping across the basement floor. Boxes, old furniture, forgotten junk. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the dread I felt in that moment was suffocating. It was like every cell in my body was screaming at me that something was horribly, horribly wrong. Then I saw it. In the far corner, there was a small door, like a crawlspace entrance, but older, made of wood that looked warped and rotten with age. It was barely noticeable, tucked behind some shelving, but as soon as the light hit it, I knew that's where I had to go. My body started moving toward it on its own, even though my mind was begging me to stop. Every step felt heavier, like the air was getting thicker the closer I got. When I reached the door, I crouched down and hesitated. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the old metal latch. There was this sound, like a faint scratching, coming from the other side. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, persistent. My heart was racing, my palms drenched. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't stop. The latch gave way with a groan, and the door creaked open. The smell hit me first, this overwhelming stench of rot, like something had been left to decay in the dark for years. I gagged, my stomach turning, but I couldn't back away. I shined the flashlight into the crawl space, and at first, I didn't see anything. Just dirt, debris, and shadows. But then, in the farthest corner, something moved. It was so fast, I almost missed it. A blur of motion, like something small and alive, darting deeper into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively backed away. But my body, this memory, moved toward it. I crawled into the space, the low ceiling forcing me onto my hands and knees. The ground was cold and wet beneath me, and the scratching sound grew louder, more frantic. I could barely see, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my trembling hand. But as I crawled deeper, the light caught something. A small, hunched figure, crouched in the corner, its back facing me. It wasn't human. I can't explain what I saw without sounding insane, but the best way I can describe it is that it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, bent at unnatural angles, and its skin was stretched tight over bones that jutted out at sharp angles. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. The thing shifted, moving slightly, and that's when I saw its hand. It was clutching something small and metallic, reflecting the weak light. I leaned closer, trying to make it out, but the second the beam landed on its hand, the figure whipped around. It was too fast to fully process. I only caught a glimpse of it, a twisted face, hollow eyes, a mouth stretched too wide. But the instant I saw it, the screen went black again. I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. My fingers were still curled around the edge of my desk, gripping so hard my knuckles were white. I could still smell that basement, that rot. I could still hear that scratching. It hadn't been a memory. It was more like a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. But here's the part that really messed with me. After a few minutes, I managed to calm down enough to glance at the clock. Only about 10 minutes had passed since I clicked that third memory. But when I looked down at my hands, I noticed something. My nails were dirty. Not just dirty, caked with dirt, like I'd been digging into something. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't moved from my chair the whole time. There was no way my hands could be like this. Unless... I stood up slowly and walked to my bedroom door. glancing down the hallway toward the basement stairs. The door was slightly ajar, even though I knew I had locked it earlier. I don't know how I knew, but I was certain of one thing. Whatever was in that basement memory wasn't just there. It was here now. I stood frozen in my bedroom doorway, staring down the hall at the basement door. It was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of darkness spill out, like an invitation. I hadn't been down there in weeks, and I was certain, positive, that door had been locked. I felt my pulse quicken again, that all too familiar dread crawling up my spine. Everything about that memory, that thing in the basement, it couldn't have been real. But here I was, dirt under my nails, and a basement door open when it shouldn't have been. My rational brain told me there had to be some kind of explanation. Maybe I'd forgotten to lock it. Maybe I'd tracked in the dirt from outside and hadn't noticed. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the truth was gnawing at me. Whatever I had experienced in that crawl space wasn't just in my head. I thought about calling someone, but what was I going to say? That I'd been browsing the deep web and now something was messing with my house? I'd sound insane. Hell, I felt insane. My mind was racing, my body locked in place. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. I had to check the basement. I don't know why. Maybe it was the same twisted curiosity that got me into this mess in the first place. But before I even realized what I was doing, I found myself stepping into the hallway, my bare feet making soft, almost imperceptible sounds on the cold wooden floor. The basement door loomed closer, the air growing colder with every step. The darkness spilling from the cracks seemed denser, like the shadows were thicker than they should have been. I reached the door and placed my hand on it. The wood felt damp and cold, like it had been left out in the rain. Slowly, I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, my hand instinctively flicking the light switch. Nothing. The basement was swallowed in pitch-black darkness. The bulb probably burned out, but that wasn't unusual. I cursed under my breath and reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The weak, narrow beam of light barely penetrated the dark, but it was better than nothing. I stood there for a moment, the beam shaking slightly as I pointed it down the stairs. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid, but something deep inside was pushing me forward, that same pull I'd felt ever since I clicked the first memory. The rational part of my mind was screaming at me to leave, to turn around and forget the whole thing, but my body didn't listen. I stepped down onto the first stair, and the wood creaked beneath my weight. I forced myself down, one step at a time, the silence so thick it felt suffocating. My phone's light skimmed the basement floor as I reached the bottom, revealing a familiar sight. Old furniture, boxes stacked against the far wall, and the concrete floor, just as damp and cold as I remembered. Everything looked the same, but that smell, that horrible stench of rot, was back, and it was stronger than before. I felt nauseous, but I pressed on, the beam of my flashlight scanning the basement. It was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing, the crawl space door. It was open. I stopped in my tracks, the light trembling in my hand as I stared at it. My head started spinning, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I hadn't touched that door in years. I didn't even think it could open anymore. It was so warped and old. But there it was, hanging open, the entrance leading into a dark void beneath the house. The same crawl space from the memory, the one where I'd seen that thing. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. There was no sound coming from inside, no movement. But the air felt wrong, heavy, like the weight of the house was pressing down on me. I took a shaky step forward, my legs feeling like jelly, my mind screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I had to see. I crouched down, shining the flashlight into the crawl space. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the damp dirt floor and the cobwebs clinging to the wooden beams. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, just like in the memory, something moved in the corner. It was subtle, a twitch of motion, but I saw it. I sucked in a breath and leaned closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam flickered for a second, and in that instant, I thought I saw something. A pair of eyes. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled back, the flashlight beam darting across the space. The eyes were gone, but I was sure, positive, I had seen them, watching me from the far corner, just like in the memory. I was about to back away when I heard it. That scratching. It started soft, barely audible over my ragged breathing, but then it grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the crawl space. Something was in there. Something was coming closer. I froze, my whole body locking up in terror. The scratching intensified, moving toward me, and before I could react, the flashlight in my hand flickered and went out, pitch black. I scrambled to turn it back on, my fingers fumbling on the slick surface of my phone. The scratching was right at the entrance now, like it was crawling toward me. My stomach churned, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I slammed the flashlight button again and again, cursing under my breath, until, finally, the light came back on. And there was nothing. The crawl space was empty, just as it had been before. But the door, it was closed now. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't touched it. Something had closed it from inside. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I stumbled up the stairs. I didn't stop until I was back in the hallway, slamming the basement door shut behind me, the echo of it ringing through the empty house. My chest heaved, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. None of this made any sense. The memories, the crawl space, the thing I had seen, or thought I'd seen. But it didn't matter. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was in that memory, whatever had been in that basement, it was here now, and it wasn't going away. As I stood there catching my breath, I glanced at my laptop on the desk. The black screen was still open. The list of memories was still there, waiting. But one of them had changed. A new entry had appeared at the top of the list. September 21st, 2024. Tonight, it comes upstairs. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. September 21st, 2024. Tonight, it comes upstairs. That was today. Tonight. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could this be on the list? It didn't make sense. The other memories, they were someone else's, right? Some twisted archive of things that happened to people. But this was me. This was my memory, and it was happening right now. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, paralyzed. The house felt unnaturally quiet, like the air itself had gone still, waiting. The only sound was my own breathing, shallow, uneven. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for me to do something, but I couldn't. I was frozen. A low, creaking sound broke the silence. The basement door. It was subtle, but I heard it, just enough to send my pulse into overdrive. The creak wasn't coming from the hinge, but from the wood itself, as if something heavy had pressed against it. I backed away from the laptop, my eyes darting to the door at the end of the hall. I could see the outline of the door frame, still shut, but the air around it felt different, like it was humming with anticipation. I took a step backward, my back pressing against the far wall. My legs felt like they could give out at any moment. I glanced at my phone, still clutched in my hand, but I didn't call anyone. There was no one to call. What would I even say? Hey, I've been exploring the dark web, and now something from a memory is trying to get into my house? Yeah, right. The door creaked again, this time louder, more insistent. I stared at it, waiting for something, anything to happen. Every muscle in my body tensed as I tried to listen, but the house was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Then, without warning, there was a soft, deliberate tap on the door. Just once, like something was testing it. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind flashed back to the basement, to the thing in the crawl space, the way it had moved, the way it had watched me. It was here. Somehow, it had followed me up from the memory, that new entry on the list. It wasn't just a warning. It was telling me what was happening, right now. I took another step back, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of here. But where would I go? The front door was too far away, and the last thing I wanted was to go anywhere near the basement again. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but I couldn't think straight. All I knew was that I had to stay away from the door. Then the tapping stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it had gone away. I stood perfectly still, straining to hear anything. Silence. And then the door clicked. Not like it was being unlocked. It was more like the latch had been released. My stomach twisted into knots. I was too far away to reach it in time, too far to stop whatever was on the other side from coming through. The door began to slowly inch open. I held my breath, watching as the gap widened, revealing only darkness on the other side. No footsteps, no movement, just the sound of the door gently pushing against its hinges. It swung open about halfway, then stopped. I waited, expecting to see something, but there was nothing, just the open door and the dark hallway beyond it. My flashlight, still in my hand, felt useless. Whatever was there, I knew the light wasn't going to help me. Then came the sound, a faint, scraping noise, like fingernails dragging across the wooden floor, coming from inside the hallway. My chest tightened, my whole body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. I aimed the flashlight toward the open door, my hands trembling. The beam barely illuminated the hallway beyond, but I could see it. A shape. Something low to the ground, hunched over, moving slowly on all fours. It was just out of the light's reach, but I could make out the shape of its limbs. Too long, bent in unnatural ways. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. It crawled closer, the scraping sound now mixed with a low, guttural breathing, like it was struggling with each movement. Then, it stopped. The shape lingered just outside the light, half hidden in the shadows. I couldn't see its face, thank God I couldn't, but I could feel its eyes on me, the same way I'd felt them in the crawl space. It was waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to make a move. I stood frozen, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. The thing shifted, and I saw its hand. Long, gnarled fingers, reaching forward slowly, tapping the edge of the doorway. It was testing the boundary, like it was daring me to run. My skin crawled as it stretched one long, bony finger into the light, and then it spoke. Not with words. There was no voice, but the sound, a low, garbled noise that seemed to vibrate the air around me. It wasn't a language I understood, but the meaning was clear. It knew me. It knew who I was, what I'd seen, and what I'd done. It had been in those memories, watching, waiting, and now it was here, for me. Without thinking, I backed up, stumbling over the edge of the bed and falling to the floor. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. The thing inched closer, its fingers stretching farther into the light, tapping against the floor with slow, deliberate movements. I couldn't take it anymore. I scrambled to my feet, turned, and ran. I didn't care where. I just needed to get out. I threw open the bedroom window, the cool night air hitting me like a shock. Without thinking, I hoisted myself through the opening, dropping down onto the grass below. My legs buckled as I hit the ground, but I didn't stop. I ran. I didn't care where. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed for me to stop. When I finally did, I was several blocks away, standing under a streetlight, panting and drenched in sweat. I looked back toward my house, the windows dark, the basement door now just a distant memory. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No movement, no sound, just the distant hum of the streetlights and the occasional car passing by. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and with shaking hands, I pulled it out. It was a message from Cade 9. You opened the wrong memory. I stared at the screen, my mind numb, my body shaking. That was the last message I ever got from him. After that, the account disappeared, gone, like it had never existed in the first place. I never went back to the house. I couldn't. I packed up what little I could carry and left that night, moving as far away as I could. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the memories. All I knew was that whatever I had opened, whatever I had let out, it wasn't just part of the dark web. It was part of me now, and I couldn't escape it.